Thanks for continuing on with us. My name is Ibrahim Sani, taking over from my colleague Nabila Khaleeda. Of course, we're taking a look into the whole notion of the World Bank downgrading its 2023 global growth forecast to 1.7% from its last June projection of 3%, as the slowing economy is facing elevated inflation, higher interest rates, reduced investments, and of course disruption caused by the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Given the fragile economic conditions, any new adverse developments such as higher than expected inflation, abrupt rises in interest rates to contain it, and a resurgence of the COVID-19 pandemic, escalating geopolitical tensions and many more could push the global economy into recession.
Global economy is on a razor's edge. We are expecting a very sharp downturn this year. This was actually our downside scenario 6 months ago. It is now our baseline. Global growth will be around 1.7%. This is the lowest growth rate outside of global recessions since the early 1990s. Because of the possibility of inflation remaining elevated, that could trigger financial stress in some emerging market developing economies, and that could also trigger a global recession. We have a major war in Europe still there. Geopolitical tensions could escalate. Food and energy insecurity could be a problem. Social tensions, another major risk. And of course, COVID outbreaks, we cannot basically rule out. Beyond these, we should always keep in mind risk associated with climate change, the higher likelihood of natural disasters, as well as weaker growth outcomes, much weaker than what we are expecting. And there is this broader risk of fragmentation of global trade, investment, financial networks.
So to unpack all of this, joining me is Dr. Shankaran Nambia, the Senior Research Fellow at the Malaysian Institute of Economic Research, or MIER. Dr. Nambia, the World Bank said that the expected global GDP growth of 1.7% in 2023 is going to be the slowest pace outside the 2009 and 2020 recessions since 1993. And its previous global economic prospects report in June last year argued that the forecast was supposed to be at 3%. How do you make all of this, Dr. Nambia?
I think there is no doubt that we are going to run into a slowdown, and there's definitely going to be a global slowdown. But I'm not quite sure if it would be as dramatic or as painful as is sometimes made to be. Yes, I have no doubt that the US is likely to go into recession, but I think on the side of the US, that doesn't seem to be just one story on what is likely to happen. There's of course the view, and maybe that's the dominant view, that the US might go into a recession, but there's also the view that it's likely to be soft and perhaps not as pronounced as some would have it. So, and on the side of China, I think, yes, there was some difficulty with the property market. It looked as if the COVID crisis would result in very stringent measures, but that does not seem to be the case. They are adopting a more open policy this time around. So true growth coming out of China may not be exuberant, but I guess it still wouldn't be as pessimistic as some would have it to be. So yes, on the China side, there is likely to be some growth, but it would be bumpy.
The forecast global growth for 2024 next year is expected to be picked up from 2.9% to 2.7%, again, slower rate. And of course, World Bank argues that the average growth for the 2020 to 2024 period would still be under 2%, the slowest 5-year pace since 1960. Do you feel that this is something of a concern, Dr. Nambia, considering that many other items are also at risk, from geopolitical tensions, not least from, say, Russia-Ukraine conflict, but of course the China-Taiwan conflict or potential conflict, rising interest rates, and of course the potential recession that is happening or could happen in the US as well as Western Europe right now?
Yes, you have all these downside risks. There is on China, Taiwan conflict, I think, yes, you would have hotspots. I think the debate might get loud, noisy. It would stir anxiety, but I don't think it would be in anyone's interest. And I'm sure China realizes it to get into any conflict with Taiwan. I mean, it would have very severe global repercussions. Ukraine, Russia, Ukraine, I suppose that's likely to drag on. It doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. There is, of course, the possibility, though remote, of nuclear weapons being used, but I think the chance of that happening is not too worrying. But the fact that it does exist will, of course, disturb markets. So given this, and yes, on the interest rate hikes, I suppose it might not be too alarming. I wouldn't be too alarmed by it. Yes, I do see that the Fed would want to have interest rate hikes, but I think the governor has recently made a statement saying, indicating that she has been pleased with the measures that have been taken, but she does underline the fact that more work needs to be done. Given this whole set of conditions, I think, yes, we need to make preparations in the event of a recession.
Okay, because of the downside risks, Dr. Nambia, we have to ask, what is the impact in Malaysia? Does the same risk apply to Malaysia? What would be some of the preparations that we can take to actually mitigate these kind of risks?
We are a small open economy, so definitely since we are very trade-based kind of nation, we depend a lot on FDIs. So of course these risks and the global recession is going to affect us. And of course, last year growth was pretty good. So based on a high growth rate, I think upward space would be fairly limited. What are the preparations? Obviously, we do need to make preparations. What are the preparations that we do need to make? I think inflation will have to be anchored. We'll have to find some way of handling those issues, because it's likely if there are blockades, etc., the Russia-Ukraine war intensifies, that's definitely going to have some impact on food prices, etc. So we'll have to look at what is going on here locally. We'll have to, of course, make sure that the prices of essential commodities are in some way maintained. And that might involve a number of things, perhaps a campaign to get more agricultural production going on, maybe at the village level. So the inflation side, cost of living side will have to be looked at, and labor shortage was an issue. I think the respective ministry is looking into it more seriously. So that's a good thing that's happening. And we'll have to start thinking about the kind of support that we are likely to give the most disadvantaged sections of the economy in the event that you have a recession, that there are job cuts, etc. I think we'll have to think of what we do along those lines. And I think that the Prime Minister was seemed very keen on restructuring the whole issue of subsidies. That definitely needs to be looked at, and perhaps it's more important now than earlier on to make sure that the subsidies are targeted, because going forward, and especially if economic conditions are not terribly favorable, we might have to take a looser approach to the whole question of subsidies.
And of course, we're expecting the Fed to give hints that they will be more aggressive in raising interest rates in the US. We're also looking at Malaysia possibly raising for sure 25 bips at least for this round, but there are some speculation that it could go up to 50 bips or 75 bips based on the 2 or 3 more MPC meetings that could take place throughout the year. Where do you see this whole idea of interest rates hike, not just in Malaysia, but of course in the US? Do you feel that we're nearer the term of ending the rate hike cycle, or are we still aggressively raising rates in the years, in the months to come?
I think you can expect perhaps at least 2 rate hikes coming out of the Fed, and I suppose these rate hikes would happen till the first half of next year, following which, if you have inflation rates tapering downwards, the Fed is likely to be less aggressive on its rate hikes. So perhaps the second half of the year, as you see inflation sort of tapering down in the US, that would also be a signal to slow down on the rate hike. So yes, I think BNM in response, Bank Negara in response to what's happening in the Fed, would not want to see too much of a divergence in interest rates between the US and Malaysia.
And of course, we're looking at the financing rate that could be applied to businesses, especially the SMEs in this country. We're also looking at higher borrowing costs, higher cost of capital, and many more. How do you think this is going to impact SMEs in this country, Dr. Nabila?
A little bit of a problem there, I guess. I think SMEs would be constrained. Those who are planning to upgrade, planning to get into IR 4.0, those that want to expand the facilities, those that want to acquire capital, I think they would be constrained. The interest rate hike would not be terribly helpful for them. And in the face of a recession, you might find that those export-oriented SMEs might face a little bit of a crunch on that side too. So I suppose it might be a little bit of a constraining period for the SMEs, particularly the export-oriented SMEs.
Okay, and we're also looking at the concept of the rising inflation rate, cost of living throughout the rest of the year. And it's also important for us to look at the inflation by buckets or items. Transportation and technology has been dipping in terms of the inflation rate. But when we talk about food, the inflation rate has gone up. quite considerably, healthcare, and of course education. So how do we see these three items being lumped together as the cost of living problem that we have to mitigate or at least address this year, Dr. Nambia?
I think perhaps the most pressing problem is cost of living, cost of food items. That's something that affects B40, M40 tremendously. A lot more effort has got to be put into those areas. I think those are the starter problems that have to be looked at. One, as I suggested earlier on, is to kind of step up agricultural production, maybe at even at the kampung level. There has to be some campaign and efforts to encourage cultivation of vegetables, etc. I think we also have to look at importing more liberally from some of our surrounding countries to the extent that it's possible. So yes, food is perhaps the most pressing problem. Healthcare, I think has for quite some time been under the radar. There has been talk even in previous administrations to improve the quality of healthcare, access to healthcare, etc. And I think that has to be taken more seriously. So yes, these I think are some of the efforts that have to be undertaken, and perhaps with greater urgency now than might have been the case last year.
And of course, Dr. Nambia, we're also looking at supply chain disruption as a potential risk. And of course, how do we see this tying up with the rest of the growth of Malaysia? This is a new administration. We have to talk about the budget 2023 retabling. So there's still a few other items in store for us to actually explore. Maybe we can start with budget 2023 retabling that's going to happen on the February 24th. What would be some of the items that you personally are looking at right now? And most importantly, what are the kind of indicators or markers that you're trying to see this within this retabling of the budget?
I think obviously this budget will have to take into account the possible recession, and it will have to again target the SMEs. As I mentioned earlier on, they would need some kind of support. We would also need to support disadvantaged groups, and I don't think you should rule out the possibility of handouts. It's likely to be a difficult period for many in the B40. It's probably not the best of things that can be done, but since we don't yet have something that is more structural, for instance, unemployment insurance, health insurance. We don't have these mechanisms in place yet. Social security system, since we don't have these mechanisms in place yet, I think the budget should look at these things. And of course, I think as usual, we need to look at single mothers, the disadvantaged, broadly speaking, those in micro industries, etc., who would perhaps face the brunt of any slowdown.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nambia, for sharing your views this morning. Of course, are you rather optimistic for 2023 compared to 2022?
Oh, no. I can't be more optimistic about 23 as compared to 2022. Definitely not. I hope I didn't give that impression.
Okay.
It's just that I think it might not be as bad as the more pessimistic observers have been indicating. But definitely, it's not going to be a walk in the park. It is going to be challenging.
Okay, thank you very much. That was Dr. Shankara Nambia, the Senior Research Fellow at MIER, or the Malaysia Institute of Economic Research. We now move on to some international news. Goldman Sachs said yesterday it expects the Eurozone economy to grow by 0.6% this year, compared with its previous forecast of a contraction. This is thanks to a fall in natural gas prices and the reopening of China's borders. Goldman Sachs economists, led by Sven Jari Sten, said that they maintain their view that the euro area growth will be weak over the winter months, given the energy crisis, but no longer look for a technical recession. The Eurozone inflation is expected to be around 3.25% at the end of 2023, compared with 4.50% forecasted earlier this year. Core inflation for the region is also slowing at 3.3% by year-end as goods prices cool down, but continued an upward pressure, as is expected on services inflation due to rising labour costs. Given the sticky nature of inflation, Goldman Sachs expects the European Central Bank to remain hawkish and deliver a 50 basis points hike in February this year and March, before slowing to a 25 basis points for a terminal rate of 3.25% in May this year. Wall Street equities were rising while Treasury yields were falling, and the dollar was flat yesterday as investors bet that upcoming US inflation data would give the Federal Reserve the go-ahead to slow the pace of its interest rate hikes. Longer-dated Treasury yields fell a day before the release of December's US Consumer Price Index, or CPI, data, as the market bet that inflation is on a sustainable downward path that could lead the Federal Reserve to at least slow its rate hikes. Meanwhile, the dollar was barely higher and gold was virtually unchanged after earlier scaling an 8-month peak. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 199.59 points, or 0.59%. The S&P 500 gained 36.63 points, or 0.93 points, and the Nasdaq Composite added 1.23%, or 132 points. The Pan-European Stocks 600 Index rose 0.38%, and the MSCI's gauge of stocks across the globe gained 0.83%. Emerging market stocks rose 0.28%. Oil prices rose 3% to a one-week high yesterday as hopes for an improved global economic outlook and concern over the impact of sanctions on the Russian crude output outweighed a massive surprise build in US crude stocks. Brent futures rose $2.57, or 3.2%, to settle at $82 a barrel. The US WTI crude rose $2.29, or 3.1%, to settle at $77.41 a barrel. Both benchmarks settled at their highest since December 30th last year, with WTI up for a 5th day in a row for the first time since October last year, and Brent up a 3rd day in a row for the first time since December last year. Global equities were up on hopes that US inflation and earnings figures due on Thursday today will indicate a resilient economy and result in a slower pace of interest rate hikes. If inflation comes in below expectations, that would drive the dollar lower, analysts said, which could boost oil demand because it makes crude cheaper for buyers holding other currencies. For the Federal Reserve, it is likely to hike its target interest rate for the first time at its January 31st and February 1st monetary policy meeting, raising it by 50 basis points to a range of 4.75% to 5.00%. The Federal Reserve's independence from political influence is central to its ability to battle inflation, but requires it stay out of issues like climate change that are beyond its congressionally established mandate. Fed Chair Jerome Powell said yesterday that the Fed's regulatory powers give it a narrow role to ensure financial institutions appropriately manage the risks they face, particularly from climate change. But the restatement came in sharp terms of his first public remarks since the US Republican Party installed one of its members as a Speaker of its House Representatives. This began selecting new chairs for committees that oversee federal government operations, including the Fed. Also in the news, Jerome Powell said that now in his 5th year as Fed chair, we're looking at the US Federal Reserve to put a high priority on building strong relationships with elected officials, both from major US parties, but faced criticism from some Republicans for their view. This is allowing the Fed to wander from its core responsibilities into areas like climate change and the economics of race. The US Federal Reserve Chair speaks in Washington. We now move on to some news on tech. Microsoft Corporation is in talks to invest $10 billion in ChatGPT owner OpenAI as part of funding that will value the firm OpenAI at $29 billion. This is reported on Monday. The news underscores rising interest in the artificial intelligence company whose chatbot has dazzled amateurs and industry experts with its ability to spit out haikus, debug code, and answer questions while imitating human speech. The software giant had, in 2019, invested $1 billion in OpenAI, founded by Elon Musk and Sam Altman. Microsoft last year unveiled plans to integrate image generation software from OpenAI into its search engine Bing. According to Semaphore, Microsoft will also get 75% of OpenAI's profits until it recoups its initial investment. After hitting that threshold, Microsoft would have a 49% stake in OpenAI, with other investors taking another 49% and OpenAI's non-profit parent getting 2%. This is all based on Semaphore's report. Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba Group Holding Limited has signed a cooperation agreement with the government of Hangzhou, the company where the city is located. The Chinese interest giant have been in the crosshairs of Chinese regulators for the past 2 years, but authorities have in recent months given increasing signs that relations between the government and the tech sector is thawing, which would bode well for the sector's prospects. The government-backed Zhejiang Daily reported that at the signing event, local authorities formulated specific measures to help develop the online platform economy. The signing comes just days after Ant Group Corporation Limited, the finance company affiliated with Alibaba, announced that Jack Ma has ceded control of the company. The announcement caused shares of Alibaba and other Ant Group affiliated companies to soar as investors interpreted the move as possibly to cap to a years-long regulatory crackdown on the Chinese tech industry. US banking giants are forecasted to report lower fourth-quarter profits this week as lenders stockpile rainy day funds to prepare for an economic slowdown that is battering investment. For American banking giants, JP Morgan Chase & Co., Bank of America Corporation, Citigroup Incorporated, and Wells Fargo & Co. will report earnings this Friday. Along with Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, they are the 6th largest lenders, expected to amass a combined $5.7 billion in reserves to prepare for secured loans, according to average projections by Refinitiv. The Federal Reserve is raising interest rates aggressively in an effort to tame inflation near its highest in decades. Rising prices and higher borrowing costs have prompted consumers and businesses to curb their spending. And since banks serve as an economic middleman, their profits decline when activity slows down. The 6 banks are also expected to report an average 17% drop in net profit in their fourth quarter from a year earlier, according to preliminary analysts' estimates from Refinitiv. So those are the kind of updates and reports that we can bring to you this morning. And of course, after 2 weeks of hitting 2023, there are plenty more of items that needs to be covered. Do stay tuned with all the news and all the current affair conversations on all of Astro Awani's platform. My name is Ibrahim Sani. Have a good one today.